Today I'll be showing you how to make a basic acrylic patch. DIY patches are a cheap and easy way to add a personal touch to about anything you feel like slapping them onto. There's no one correct way to go about this. I'm just going to show you the workflow that I developed over the last couple months. For this you'll need an iron as well as a surface to iron on. I'll be using a folded up towel for this video, but I highly recommend using an actual ironing board. I use sticker paper during my stenciling process, but you could use some cardstock and tape if your design is pretty simple. You'll need at least 2 colors of paint. Always use your darkest color as the backdrop and then your lighter colors as the design itself. I'll use 2 flat brushes for application, but will sometimes need a finer tip brush to touch things up later on. I like to keep painter's tape on hand for a handful of reasons. I'll show you how I use it in my stenciling process here in a moment, but I've also used it to cut into specific shapes before when I've messed up my stencils. You'll need some fabric scissors for cutting your patch down to size, as well as a hobby knife for cutting out your stencil. You'll of course need a craft mat like this one, or you'll probably cut the hell out of your workstation as you go along. Lastly, you're going to need your fabric base. I suggest something very non-stretchy like a denim or a canvas. With all your supplies assembled, we're ready to get started. I'll start by dry ironing the fabric we're going to use. Not only does this get it nice and flat, but the heat helps the material take the paint better. Once you feel it's ready, apply 2 layers of your darker paint. After I set that aside to dry, I'll get started on my stencil. Your design can be whatever you want, and you can go about this in a couple different ways. You can freehand something onto your paper. I just tend to trace things for time and quality's sake. Here you can see that I've literally just put a David Lynch quote on a white background. I'm using a drawing tablet here, but that's not necessarily mandatory. I just think something with some light coming through makes it easier to actually see the image you're tracing. I'm using my painter's tape here to secure it to the screen as to not leave any adhesive behind when I'm done. Now I'll sit back and trace this while my patch continues to dry. My stencil's ready to go. My fabric is dried for a little shy of 2 hours, but drying time can vary depending on the amount of color and the size of the patch you're doing. If you're using sticker paper like me, you'll peel off the back and apply it to your fabric. Start from a single edge or corner and try to flatten it the best you can. Next, you'll take your hobby knife and begin carefully cutting out your stencil. Be very mindful of your downward pressure here, because it is possible to just cut straight through your fabric and leave holes. Here I'm showing how cutting out little islands in your stencil can be done easier. You can cut things like this in little segments as to avoid pulling off the center bit. The tip of your hobby knife can slide right under these cuts you make, so lifting these shapes out should be a breeze. You'll get more of a feel of this with repetition. Once the entire design is cut out, you're ready to paint again. Grab your lighter color paint and your other flat brush. I'll be painting radially from the center while trying my best to paint parallel with the edges of the stencil. This will hopefully reduce bleeding and result in a clean final product. Note that we want this layer to be as uniform as possible to give us a consistent image. After this layer dries, I'll peel off the bigger part of the stencil, then work out the inner pieces with my hobby knife. My initial thoughts are that this looks okay from afar, but there's a few spots that bother me. I'll scrape up any blood over paint with the end of my knife while shaking away the flakes. I'm going to touch up with some black paint, but I don't want to be layering a bunch of paint and adding unwanted texture. These are only very minor touch-ups I'm doing here. I'm not exactly shooting for 100% perfect. I think that the little imperfections add character, I just want it to be legible. Once any remaining paint is dry, I'll start cutting the patch to roughly the size I'll need it later. Definitely take some consideration here if you plan on hemming or sewing the edges. All that's left to do now is place your patch paint side down on the station and dry iron it one last time. That's it, you're done. An incredibly basic DIY patch. Here's how mine came out, complete with towel fibers and pet hair. Alright, so what's next? Well, you put it on something. You put it on something that already exists. You put it on something completely new. I don't care, just put it on something. I'm not going to go too much into how to do that here. It feels more appropriate for its own video, and I wanted to keep this one pretty centered around just making patches themselves. Upon completing your first one, just dive right into your next one. Represent a band, draw a little character, make a statement. Just have fun with it, and make it you. To close out, I want to suggest that you don't stop with this video. There are tons of resources out there on this topic, as well as things adjacent to it, that I think you might find interesting if you really got something out of this video. I'll include some links in the description to a few sources that helped me figure out my workflow really early on. Also, check back here down the line sometime. Maybe I'll make another tutorial someday if I feel like it. Did you like my workflow? Did you fucking hate it? Let me know. Leave a comment. Other than that, that's all I got. Bye.